"She will not last a month here," Duke Julian told his butler as Eleanor entered the great hall. Then, without looking at his wife, he handed control of Blackthorn House to the steward she had accused of theft. Mr. Harcourt accepted the household keys with a smile that vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. The heavy iron ring settled into his palm with a metallic clatter. Eleanor stopped beneath the ancestral portraits. Rain still glistened on the shoulders of her travelling cloak, and the hem of her burgundy gown was dark with mud from the long road back from London. Only 3 weeks had passed since her wedding. Already, her husband spoke of her departure as though it were certain. "Your Grace," Eleanor said calmly, "those keys traditionally belong to the mistress of this house." Julian finally looked at her. His handsome face revealed no embarrassment, only the cold impatience that had replaced the courtesy of their brief courtship. "You are my wife," he replied. "Do not mistake that for permission to interfere in matters you do not understand." Harcourt lowered his eyes, disguising his satisfaction. Eleanor had spent the previous 10 years assisting her father's trading company. She could detect an altered contract, calculate the cost of a delayed shipment, and recognize when a man was hiding theft behind complicated figures. 3 days earlier, she had found payments for coal that had never reached Blackthorn, and invoices for repairs no workman remembered completing. Julian had dismissed every concern. Now he was rewarding the man whose record she had questioned. The butler, Mr. Bell, stood near the staircase, with his hands folded behind his back. His expression remained disciplined, but Eleanor saw his jaw tighten when Harcourt attached the keys to his belt. Julian held out a sealed letter. "These are the conditions under which you will remain at Blackthorn." Eleanor broke the black wax and unfolded the paper. She was forbidden from examining estate accounts, issuing instructions to servants, entering the steward's office, or communicating with suppliers in the Duke's name. Even the kitchens and storerooms would remain under Harcourt's authority. "You married me because Blackthorn needed my dowry," she said. A faint flush rose beneath Julian's collar. "I married you because your father made refusal financially impossible. And now that the first payment has cleared, you intend to treat me as an unwanted guest. I intend to protect my family's estate from a woman who thinks every noble house should be run like a warehouse." Eleanor folded the letter carefully. Her father's money had stopped Blackthorn's creditors from closing its gates, yet Julian despised the commercial knowledge that had produced that money. He wanted her fortune without her judgment, and her obedience without her respect. There was a moment when he might still have chosen differently. Eleanor removed the suspicious delivery receipt from her reticule and placed it on the table between them. 10 sacks of flour were charged to this household this morning. Only one reached the kitchen. The signature approving the delivery appears to be yours. Julian glanced at the paper, but did not touch it. "I signed dozens of orders before leaving for London. This one was written in blue ink." "So, you use black ink?" "Mr. Harcourt uses blue." Harcourt stepped forward. "Her Grace is searching for crimes because she resents the limits your Grace has placed upon her." "Then open your office," Eleanor said. "Show my husband your ink and the original delivery ledger." For the first time, the steward's composure shifted. His thumb pressed against the largest key on the ring. Julian noticed it. Eleanor knew he had noticed it. Still, wounded pride hardened his expression. "There will be no inspection," he declared. "Harcourt has served my family for 16 years. You have lived here for 21 days. With those words, Julian turned away from the evidence and crossed the hall. The decision was his alone. Eleanor watched him disappear into the library before facing Harcourt. "The servants will take their instructions from me," he said quietly. "You would be wise to remember that." Eleanor said nothing. She removed her gloves, placed them beside Julian's unread receipt, and walked toward the servants' corridor. The kitchen was colder than the great hall. A single fire struggled beneath an iron range, while the cook divided a small quantity of flour into careful portions. 2 kitchen maids stood beside her, their faces pale with hunger. "How many people must this feed?" Eleanor asked. The cook hesitated. 40, Your Grace, including the stable boys. And tomorrow? There is nothing for tomorrow." Eleanor pushed up her sleeves. "Then we shall make it last tonight." She worked beside them, measuring flour, stretching broth with potatoes, and cutting each loaf into equal pieces. She did not issue commands. She asked questions, and slowly, the frightened servants answered. Coal had disappeared, before reaching the cellars. Meat deliveries arrived at half the quantity recorded. 3 footmen had received no wages for 8 weeks. Medicine, intended for an elderly maid, had been charged twice, but never delivered. Every failure led back to Harcourt's office. Near midnight, Eleanor returned to the great hall. The house was unnaturally silent. Then every clock stopped at once. The tall clock beside the staircase ceased first. A second later, the drawing-room clock fell quiet, followed by the smaller clocks throughout the east corridor. Mr. Bell emerged from the darkness, carrying an empty wooden box. "The servant's wage chest," he whispered. "It was full yesterday." Eleanor examined the broken lock. It had not been forced from the outside. Someone had opened it with the correct key, removed the money, and damaged the lock afterward. Only Harcourt now possessed that key. But as Eleanor lifted the box, she found a folded sheet hidden beneath its lining. It contained a list of servants marked for dismissal, and her name appeared above them all. Beside each name was a date. The first dismissals were scheduled for the following morning. Eleanor finally understood. Harcourt was not merely stealing from Blackthorn House. He was removing everyone who might testify against him, and Julian's public rejection had just given him the authority to do it. Eleanor read the list twice before handing it to Mr. Bell. 11 names had been written beneath hers. The cook, 2 kitchen maids, 3 footmen, the head groom, the laundress, an elderly housemaid, the estate carpenter, and Bell himself. They were not the least useful servants in Blackthorn House. They were the longest-serving ones, the people most likely to remember what had once entered the storerooms, how much the estate had earned, and which suppliers had been trusted before Harcourt took control. "Who prepared this?" Eleanor asked. "I do not know, Your Grace, but you recognize the handwriting." Bell's silence answered her. "Harcourt?" "Yes, and my husband has approved it." Bell turned the empty wage chest toward the candlelight. A fragment of black wax clung beneath one brass hinge. "His Grace seals every formal dismissal. This wax bears the ducal crest." Eleanor touched the fragment, but did not remove it. A broken seal could suggest Julian's authority, but it could not prove that Julian had ever seen the list. She needed the original document, and someone willing to say how it had been prepared. "Return this chest exactly where you found it," she said. "Do not tell anyone about the paper." Bell stared at her. "If Harcourt dismisses us tomorrow, there will be no one left to help you. That is precisely why he must not know we have seen it." She folded the list and slipped it inside her sleeve. The clock in the great hall remained frozen at 12 minutes past midnight. Eleanor looked toward the gallery above them. Every clock stopping together was no mechanical failure. Someone had deliberately ordered the clocks unwound, silencing the usual chimes so movement through the house could pass unnoticed. "Which servants tend the clocks?" "2 footmen under my supervision." "Are either of them on Harcourt's list?" "Both." The pattern was becoming clearer. Harcourt was not dismissing people at random. He was removing those who could establish when doors had opened, deliveries had arrived, or money had been moved. Footsteps sounded in the passage. Bell took the chest while Eleanor extinguished the candle. They separated without another word. When Eleanor reached her rooms, she found her maid, Clara, standing beside an open wardrobe. 2 travelling trunks had been placed on the carpet. "Who ordered those?" Eleanor asked. "Mr. Harcourt, Your Grace. He said you might require them before the week is over." Eleanor removed the dismissal list from her sleeve and hid it beneath the lining of her writing case. Harcourt clearly expected Julian's humiliation to drive her away. If insult failed, he intended to create conditions that made remaining impossible. But Eleanor could not leave yet. Her marriage settlement placed the second portion of her dowry, £30,000, under a trust that would transfer funds to Blackthorn only after she had resided at the estate for 90 consecutive days. If she abandoned the house before then, Julian's creditors could reopen their claim against the Western Farms. Nearly 60 tenant families would lose their leases before winter. Her father had warned her about that clause. Eleanor had accepted it because Julian had promised that she would share responsibility for restoring Blackthorn. She now understood that he had wanted her presence only long enough to unlock her money. She slept for less than 2 hours. At dawn, she entered the kitchen and found the servants gathered beside the cold range. Harcourt stood before them, with the household keys hanging prominently from his waist. Julian watched from the doorway, immaculate in a dark blue coat, as if the removal of 11 loyal servants were an ordinary administrative matter. Harcourt unfolded a document. Because of continuing waste and disobedience, the following servants are released without references or unpaid wages. The cook began to cry before her name was called. Bell remained motionless, but one of the younger maids reached blindly for his hand. Eleanor stepped between Harcourt and the servants. "No one leaves this house today." Julian's eyes narrowed. "You were expressly forbidden from issuing instructions." "I am not issuing instructions. I am requesting evidence." "You have no authority to make that request. The servants are owed wages. Until those wages are paid, dismissing them without references would prevent them from securing new positions and conceal the disappearance of money already entered in your accounts." Harcourt folded the paper sharply. "Their wages were paid 3 days ago." "No, they were not. The receipts say otherwise." "Then show us the receipts." Julian moved closer. "Eleanor, this performance ends now." She faced him, though the contempt in his voice cut more deeply than she permitted her expression to show. "Ask one question, Julian. Ask each servant how much money was placed in his or her hand. I will not conduct an interrogation in my kitchen." "Then you are choosing a ledger over 11 living witnesses." For a moment, silence filled the room. Julian looked at Bell. The butler had served Blackthorn since Julian's childhood. If there was anyone Julian might believe, it was him. "Were you paid?" the Duke asked at last. "No, Your Grace." Harcourt reacted immediately. "Bell has allowed her Grace to turn him against this household." "This household?" Eleanor repeated. "Or against you?" Julian raised one hand. "Enough. The dismissals are postponed until tomorrow. Harcourt will review the records." Eleanor understood the compromise for what it was. Julian had not protected the servants. He had merely delayed their ruin while allowing the accused man to examine his own evidence. Still, she had won one day. As Harcourt left, Eleanor noticed blue ink on his right cuff. She waited until Julian followed him from the kitchen, then asked Bell to bring her every servant who remembered the household before Harcourt's appointment. They met separately throughout the morning. Eleanor asked simple questions. What had Blackthorn paid for coal last year? Which mill supplied flour? Who counted deliveries? When had wages first become irregular? She wrote nothing until each person had spoken, then reconstructed the figures from memory inside her room. It was a skill her father had taught her when dishonest captains altered shipping records. Never let a suspected thief know which number had betrayed him. By noon, Eleanor had established that Blackthorn's household expenses had nearly doubled in 16 months, although the number of servants had decreased. Harcourt claimed poor harvests and rising prices were responsible, but the surrounding estates had not suffered comparable increases. The fraud was larger than missing flour. Shortly after luncheon, Clara brought Eleanor a parcel wrapped in brown paper. Inside was an old household ledger, hidden years earlier by the former housekeeper. The entries showed that Blackthorn's northern mill had supplied flour without charge because the mill stood on ducal land. Eleanor compared it with the new accounts. Harcourt had recorded enormous payments to a company called Ashcombe Grain. Blackthorn had been paying for flour it already owned. Yet when Eleanor examined the supposed supplier's invoices, she discovered something even more alarming. Ashcombe Grain's address was identical to the London office of the creditor scheduled to receive the next portion of her dowry. Harcourt was not merely stealing household money. Someone was fabricating debts to ensure that Eleanor's fortune disappeared the moment it entered Blackthorn, and Julian had signed the arrangement that would make those debts enforceable. Eleanor placed the two ledgers side by side and traced the address with her finger. Ashcombe Grain claimed to operate from number 14, Wycliffe Street, the same building occupied by Pembroke and Vale, the creditors holding Blackthorn's largest private debt. That coincidence would have been suspicious enough, but the invoices also used identical paper, identical margins, and the same blue ink found on Harcourt's cuff. Eleanor needed more than resemblance, however. If she accused Harcourt without evidence strong enough to overcome Julian's loyalty, her husband would dismiss her concerns again and give the steward time to destroy everything. She carried the old ledger to the library, where Julian was reviewing correspondence beside the fire. Harcourt stood near his desk with the household keys hanging from his waist. "I requested a private conversation," Eleanor said. "And I decided Harcourt should remain," Julian replied. "Since your allegations concern him, he has a right to hear them." Harcourt's presence was not a courtesy. It was protection. Eleanor opened the old ledger. Blackthorn's Northern Mill has supplied this house with flour for more than 40 years. No payment was required beyond maintenance costs because the mill belongs to the estate. Julian glanced at the page. It belonged to the estate. What do you mean? The mill was leased last year. To whom? A commercial tenant. Arranged by Harcourt. Harcourt stepped forward. The mill had become unprofitable. Your Grace. Leasing. It produced immediate income. And Ashcombe Grain now sells its flour back to Blackthorn at 3 times the market price, Eleanor said. Who owns that company? I do not investigate the ancestry of every tradesman, Harcourt replied. I asked about ownership, not ancestry. Julian closed the letter in his hand. Do you possess proof that Harcourt benefits from the arrangement? Not yet. Then you possess another suspicion. I possess records showing that your estate surrendered an asset and began purchasing its own produce through an unknown intermediary. Julian looked at Harcourt. For one brief moment, uncertainty entered his expression. The steward answered, before he could speak. Her Grace compares current prices with figures written before the poor harvest. If she understood agricultural management, she would know how little those old accounts prove. Eleanor turned to Julian. Then permit me to visit the mill. No. Why? Because I will not have my wife riding across the county to question tenants as though she were a tax collector. The tenants may know who receives the money. Julian's expression hardened. You have already disrupted my household and encouraged servants to challenge their superiors. This inquiry ends here. Once again, he had been offered a contradiction. Once again, he chose pride over examination. Harcourt removed a folded paper from his coat. There is another matter, Your Grace. The London creditors require confirmation that Her Grace remains at Blackthorn voluntarily. Her interference may be interpreted as evidence of marital discord. Eleanor understood the threat immediately. If Julian accused her of destabilizing the household, the creditors could demand additional guarantees before releasing the estate from its obligations. Harcourt was placing her in an impossible position: remain silent while the money vanished, or resist and be blamed when the agreement collapsed. Julian signed the paper without reading more than the first paragraph. Harcourt sprinkled sand across the blue ink. Eleanor noticed a small brass measure beside the inkstand, no longer than her smallest finger. It was used for checking coin weights, but one edge had been filed into a narrow crescent. When Harcourt pressed it against a fresh lump of wax, the damaged edge left the same tiny crescent Eleanor had seen on every suspicious invoice. The bills had not merely passed through Harcourt's office, they had been sealed there. Eleanor said nothing. She needed the object preserved and its ordinary use established before Harcourt realized its importance. That afternoon, she returned to the kitchen and found the cook preparing thin broth. The single sack of flour was nearly gone. Harcourt had forbidden further supplies until the following week, claiming the household must reduce waste. Eleanor examined the pantry and asked for a complete inventory. There were dried beans behind an unused wine rack, 2 barrels of barley recorded under animal feed, and several baskets of apples beginning to spoil in the western cellar. None had appeared in the kitchen accounts. Within an hour, she devised meals sufficient for 4 days. She then asked the stable boys to collect fallen branches from land surrounding the house, providing fuel without touching the coal reserves. In return, the cook prepared warm bread and apple broth for everyone. It was a modest victory, but the effect spread quickly. Servants who had avoided Eleanor that morning now approached her with information. A maid reported seeing Harcourt remove papers from Julian's study after midnight. The head groom recalled wagons leaving through the western gate without being entered in the stable book. An elderly footman revealed that Harcourt had replaced 3 trusted suppliers with businesses registered in London. Eleanor did not ask them to choose between their duke and his steward. She asked only for facts. Before evening, Mr. Bell brought her a copy of the Northern Mills lease. The document granted control to Ashcombe Grain for 15 years, at a rent so low that the estate earned less in a year than it now paid for flour in 1 month. At the bottom appeared Julian's signature. Beside it was the impression of the ducal seal. The Duke truly signed this? Eleanor asked. I witnessed it, Bell said, but the final page was covered when Mr. Harcourt presented it. His Grace was leaving for London and did not wish to be delayed. Julian's negligence had made the scheme possible, but Harcourt had prepared the trap. Eleanor needed to know who stood behind Ashcombe Grain. She wrote a short letter to her father's former clerk in London, requesting a discreet search of company registrations. She sealed it with her personal ivory stamp and gave it to Clara, instructing her to place it directly into the hands of the Morning Post rider. The reply could expose the hidden owner within a week. Before dawn the next morning, however, Clara returned with the unopened letter. Her face was white. "Harcourt has taken control of all outgoing post," she whispered. "No letter may leave Blackthorn without his inspection." Eleanor looked beyond her maid toward the corridor. Harcourt stood at the far end, watching them. His gaze fell upon the letter in Clara's hand, then lifted slowly to Eleanor's face. There was no longer amusement in his expression. For the first time, he was looking at the Duchess not as an unwanted bride who would soon disappear, but as the one person in Blackthorn House capable of destroying him. Harcourt crossed the corridor with measured steps and stopped before Eleanor. All correspondence leaving Blackthorn must now bear His Grace's approval. Does that include the Duchess's private letters? It includes any letter capable of harming the estate. Eleanor held his gaze. Then you must be very frightened of what I might write. Harcourt's smile returned, but his eyes remained cold. He extended one hand toward Clara. "Give it to me." Clara looked to Eleanor. "The letter contains a request for my father to send winter clothing," Eleanor said. "Surely even you cannot describe petticoats as a threat to Blackthorn. Then you will not object if I read it." Eleanor handed him the sealed letter. Harcourt broke the ivory seal and unfolded the page. His expression barely changed as he read Eleanor's harmless request for wool, gloves, and blankets. Finding nothing else, he folded it again. "You may send this. Your permission is most generous." Eleanor walked away before he could see her relief. The true message had never been inside the envelope. She had written the company address in tiny figures along the wooden shaft of Clara's sewing needle, using a code once employed by her father's clerks when shipping contracts might be intercepted. Clara would carry the needle to the village seamstress, whose brother delivered parcels to London twice each week. It was a small act, but it placed one line of investigation beyond Harcourt's control. By midday, another crisis reached the house. A tenant farmer named Thomas Reed stood in the entrance hall with mud on his boots and a notice of eviction trembling in his hand. Harcourt had ordered his family to leave their cottage within 48 hours for failing to pay 6 months' rent. "I paid every quarter," Reed insisted. Mr. Harcourt himself received the money. Harcourt appeared on the staircase. "This man has been warned repeatedly. His account is empty." Reed pulled 3 worn receipts from his coat. Each bore the Blackthorn crest and Harcourt's signature. Julian entered from the library, visibly irritated by the disturbance. "What is happening?" "A dishonest tenant is attempting to delay lawful eviction," Harcourt said. Eleanor took the receipts before Harcourt could seize them. The paper felt coarse, unlike the estate stationery used in Julian's study, but the amounts and dates appeared clear. "Where is the rent ledger?" she asked. "In my office." "Then bring it." Harcourt looked to Julian. "Your Grace, this is precisely the interference I warned you about." Julian faced Eleanor. "You have no responsibility for tenant matters. A family may lose its home by tomorrow. A duchess cannot overturn every decision because someone cries in her hall." Eleanor studied the receipts again. The crest had been pressed with black wax, but each impression contained the same crescent-shaped mark she had seen on Harcourt's fraudulent invoices. The damaged brass measure had been used to shape these seals as well. "Harcourt admits the receipts are false," she said. "I said no such thing," he replied. "If they are genuine, Mr. Reed has paid. If they are forged, whoever made them possessed the same damaged sealing tool used in your office." Julian glanced at Harcourt's waistcoat pocket, where the top of the small brass measure was just visible. He saw the contradiction. Harcourt immediately removed the object and placed it on a side table. Every steward carries such a tool. Not every tool has a crescent filed into its edge. Julian picked it up and examined the damaged side. Eleanor watched uncertainty return to his face. Then Harcourt laughed softly. "Her Grace visited my office 2 days ago without permission. If these receipts were recently marked, perhaps we should ask how she gained access to my equipment." The accusation struck exactly where he intended. Julian turned toward Eleanor. "I never entered his office, but your maid has," Harcourt said. "Clara was seen near the door yesterday." Clara stepped forward. "I delivered clean linen, nothing more." Harcourt reached into his coat and produced a small ring of copied keys. These were discovered beneath her mattress this morning. Clara stared at them in horror. I have never seen those before. Eleanor understood at once. Harcourt had anticipated the challenge and planted the keys before confronting her in the corridor. He intended to discredit Clara, explain away the damaged seal, and create a thief inside Eleanor's rooms. Julian's voice became cold. Clara will be confined until this matter is investigated. No, Eleanor said. She possessed keys to restricted rooms. They were planted. You cannot know that. I know her, as I know Harcourt. The words revealed the full cruelty of Julian's position. He demanded proof from Eleanor, while granting Harcourt trust without requiring it. 2 footmen moved toward Clara. The maid's breathing quickened. Eleanor stepped between them. If Clara is confined, I go with her. Julian stared at his wife. Do not be absurd. She serves under my protection. If you believe she committed a crime for me, then accuse me openly. Do not punish a maid because you lack the courage to confront your wife. A flush spread across Julian's face. Harcourt watched them both, calculating. You would sacrifice your position for a servant? Julian asked. My position means nothing if I use it only when it is safe. Reed still stood near the doors, clutching his cap. Eleanor turned to him and placed the disputed receipts in Bell's hands. Mr. Bell witnessed their condition before anyone removed them from this hall. No one is to alter or destroy them. It was the first time she had established a clear chain of custody, and Harcourt recognized what she had done. Julian ordered Clara confined to Eleanor's rooms rather than the servants' quarters. It was a partial concession, but it came at a cost. Eleanor was forbidden from receiving visitors, entering the estate offices, or speaking privately with any servant until the keys were investigated. Harcourt then announced that Reed's eviction would proceed the following morning. From her window that evening, Eleanor saw the farmer walking toward his cottage beneath a darkening sky. His wife and 2 small children would be turned onto the road because the rent they had paid had vanished from Harcourt's books. Eleanor could not allow it. She removed a pearl brooch that had belonged to her mother and gave it to Bell. Sell this in the village tonight. Use the money to satisfy the alleged debt. Bell hesitated. That brooch is worth 20 times the amount. It will buy the Reed's time. And if His Grace discovers what you have done, he has already shown me what he values. I am merely doing the same. Bell's expression softened. In that moment, he ceased being only the Duke's servant. He became Eleanor's willing ally. The brooch was sold, the false debt paid, and the eviction suspended. By morning, however, Harcourt had rewritten the story. He told Julian that Eleanor had secretly bribed a tenant to accuse the steward of theft. Worse, he claimed the missing money had come from the servant's wage chest. Julian summoned Eleanor to the great hall and demanded an explanation before the assembled household. She told him the truth. I sold my mother's brooch. Can you prove it? He asked. The village jeweler recorded the purchase. Harcourt's confidence faltered. Eleanor turned toward the front doors. Send for him. Ask what I sold, when I sold it, and who carried the money. Then ask Mr. Reed to repeat, in front of us all, how he paid his rent. Julian looked from his wife to his steward. For the first time, Eleanor had offered him living witnesses, a dated transaction, preserved receipts, and a physical object he could inspect for himself. All Julian had to do was open the doors and summon the truth. Julian stood before the closed doors with the entire household waiting for his command. One sentence would bring the village jeweler and Thomas Reed into the hall. Their testimony could establish where Eleanor's money had come from, confirm the tenant's payments, and expose the false entries in Harcourt's ledger. Harcourt spoke before Julian could decide. Your Grace, if servants and tenants are permitted to challenge your appointed steward, whenever Her Grace encourages them, you will lose all authority over Blackthorn. It was a clever appeal. Harcourt did not ask Julian to believe him. He asked the Duke to defend his pride. Eleanor saw the change in her husband's face. This is not about your authority, she said. It is about whether you prefer the truth when it embarrasses you, or a lie that obeys you. A murmur passed through the servants. Julian's expression hardened. There will be no public spectacle. Then speak to the witnesses privately. No. Examine the jeweler's record. No. Compare Reed's receipts with Harcourt's sealing tool. I said no. The final word echoed through the hall. Julian turned to the servants. Mr. Harcourt retains my complete confidence. Anyone who questions his orders will be dismissed without a reference. Harcourt bowed, but Eleanor noticed the quick breath of relief he released. Julian had reached the moment when he could have stopped everything. The witnesses were close, the receipts were preserved, and the damaged brass measure rested within his own house. He did not lack evidence. He lacked the courage to admit that his wife might be right. Harcourt, Julian continued, prepare a formal transfer of household and estate authority. From this day, no purchase, payment, lease, dismissal, or delivery requires any approval beyond your signature and mine. Eleanor's composure nearly broke. You are giving him control of the estate accounts as well. I am ending this chaos. You are placing every acre of Blackthorn in the hands of the man accused of stealing from it. I am placing it beyond yours. Harcourt produced a document from his leather case with suspicious speed. The transfer had already been prepared. Eleanor approached the table. Read every page before you sign. Julian reached for the pen. Julian, look at me. His hand stopped. For one heartbeat, the crowded hall seemed to disappear. Eleanor remembered the man who had once visited her father's London home and listened with genuine interest as she explained how 3 failing ships had been made profitable. He had admired her intelligence then. Perhaps he had only admired what it could purchase for him. If you sign without investigating, she said quietly, whatever follows will belong to you as surely as it belongs to Harcourt. Pain flickered across Julian's face, but pride overcame it. He signed. Harcourt pressed the ducal seal into black wax beneath the signature. Then he added his own mark with the brass measure, leaving the faint crescent Eleanor now knew so well. The act gave him legal authority to negotiate supplies, collect rents, restructure private debts, and dismiss anyone who resisted him. Julian had not merely defended the steward, he had armed him. Harcourt's first order was to remove Clara from Eleanor's service. 2 footmen came forward, though neither would meet the Duchess's eyes. Clara remains with me, Eleanor said. The Duke has authorized her dismissal, Harcourt replied. She has not been proven guilty. She possessed stolen keys. You placed them beneath her mattress. Can you prove that? Not yet. Clara clutched Eleanor's hand. Please do not make matters worse, Your Grace. My mother lives in the village. If I leave without a reference, no household will employ me, and she depends upon my wages. Fear had done what Harcourt intended. Clara could not risk open defiance. Eleanor removed a small purse from her belt and pressed it into the maid's palm. This will support you for several weeks. Go to the village seamstress. Remain with her until I send for you. Thanks for watching. We coming to that I les. And telecommon. And camties. To the village seamstress. Harcourt reached for the purse, but Eleanor closed her fingers around his wrist. If you take 1 coin from her, you will do it while every person in this hall watches. His eyes narrowed. After a tense silence, he withdrew his hand. Clara curtsied, tears shining on her cheeks, and walked toward the doors. As she passed Eleanor, she whispered, the needle was sent. The message to London had escaped. That knowledge was Eleanor's only comfort as Harcourt began removing her allies. Belle was stripped of responsibility for the keys and ordered to serve only in the dining room. The cook was placed under supervision. The 2 footmen who tended the clocks were dismissed before noon. Reed was permitted to remain in his cottage, but Harcourt warned every tenant that supporting the Duchess would result in immediate review of their leases. By evening, fear had silenced the house. Eleanor was moved from the Duchess's apartments to 2 small rooms in the eastern wing. Julian claimed the change was necessary to prevent her from interfering with household operations. Her gowns, books, and writing case were searched. The dismissal list, hidden beneath the lining, was not discovered, but Harcourt confiscated her remaining money. Eleanor stood beside the narrow window as her belongings were carried away. For the first time since arriving at Blackthorn, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of her husband's rejection. She had not married for affection alone. She had believed they would build something together, her knowledge beside his inheritance, her practical discipline beside his social influence. Julian had promised partnership until the wedding contracts were signed. Then every quality he once praised became evidence that she did not belong. A quiet knock came at the door. Belle entered, carrying a supper tray. Beneath the plate lay a torn scrap from Harcourt's wastebasket, I found this after he left the estate office, Belle whispered. Eleanor read the figures. The document referred to 3 loans secured against the Western farms. The supposed lender was Pembroke and Vale, but the repayment date had been altered. Instead of becoming due the following year, the debt could now be demanded within 3 days. At the bottom was a line authorizing Harcourt to surrender the farms if payment failed. Julian's new signature appeared beneath it. He did not know this clause was there, Belle said. He chose not to know. Eleanor examined the paper more closely. The Western farms were worth more than every debt Harcourt claimed Blackthorn owed. Losing them would drive 60 tenant families from their homes and destroy the estate's principal source of income. That was Harcourt's larger purpose. He had inflated expenses, fabricated suppliers, stolen rents, and weakened the household so Blackthorn would appear insolvent. Now Julian had given him the authority to surrender its most valuable land to the same hidden company receiving Eleanor's dowry. A carriage appeared on the drive the next morning. 3 men in dark coats stepped out, carrying document cases stamped with the name Pembroke and Vale. They had not come 3 days early to discuss repayment. They had come to take possession. The representatives of Pembroke and Vale entered Blackthorn House as though they already owned it. Their senior agent, Mr. Sloane, presented Julian with a demand for immediate payment and a copy of the agreement, transferring the Western farms if the debt remained unsettled. Julian read the first page, then turned sharply toward Harcourt. You told me these loans would not mature until next year. The earlier date appears in the supplementary clause, Your Grace. I was never shown such a clause. Harcourt's answer came smoothly. Your signature confirms otherwise. Julian examined the final page. His name stood beneath the terms, witnessed by Harcourt and sealed with the ducal crest. The authority Julian had granted only the previous day allowed the steward to complete the transfer without further approval. Then I revoke his authority, Julian said. Mr. Sloane closed his document case. You may dismiss your steward, Your Grace. You cannot dismiss an agreement already executed under powers you voluntarily granted him. For the first time, Julian's title could not rescue him. He could issue orders to servants and tenants, but he could not command a creditor to forget his signature. Name the amount required, he said. Sloane handed him a statement. Julian's face lost its color. The sum exceeded the money remaining in Blackthorn's accounts. It also included penalties for missed payments Eleanor had never seen in any legitimate ledger. My wife's dowry will cover this. The second payment has not been released. It is due this week. Only after the Duchess of Blackthorn completes 90 consecutive days of residence here. According to documents received from your steward, Her Grace intends to abandon the marital home. Julian looked toward Eleanor. Harcourt had used the travelling trunks, her removal from the Duchess's apartments, and the household restrictions as evidence that she was preparing to leave. He had created the appearance of marital separation while ensuring her money could not arrive in time to prevent the seizure. I have no intention of leaving, Eleanor said. Sloane studied her. Can you prove that, Your Grace? She is standing in this house, Julian snapped. The trust requires more than her physical presence. It requires confirmation that she resides here voluntarily and retains the position promised in the marriage settlement. Eleanor almost laughed at the cruelty of it. Julian had tried to reduce her to a powerless guest, and by doing so, he had endangered the very fortune for which he married her. Sloane gave them until noon to surrender the farms. Outside, word of the seizure spread quickly. Tenant families gathered near the western fields, frightened that their cottages, animals, and stored grain would be taken with the land. Harcourt had already sent men to inventory the barns. Julian ordered them away. They refused. They act under the creditor's authority now, Sloane explained. Not yours. Julian turned on Harcourt. End this. I cannot. You arranged these debts. I managed them under your instructions. You deceived me. Harcourt's expression remained respectful, but triumph shone beneath it. I placed every document before you, Your Grace. You chose to sign. The words echoed Eleanor's warning from the previous day. Julian dismissed everyone from the library except Eleanor. When the door closed, he faced her with anger, sharpened by humiliation. You knew this would happen. I knew there was a scheme. You prevented me from discovering its full design, then helped me stop it. The request held no apology. He spoke as though her obedience remained available whenever his own judgment failed. Eleanor looked at the man who had stripped her authority, searched her rooms, dismissed her maid, and trusted Harcourt at every point where truth had been offered. "I will protect the tenant families," she said. "I will not protect you from the consequences of your choices. They are the same thing." "No, you made them the same thing because you used their homes as security for debts you refused to read." Julian flinched. Eleanor requested every document Sloane had brought. At first, the agent refused. She then pointed to the marriage settlement referenced in his demand and insisted that, as beneficiary of the trust being used as collateral, she had a right to verify the conditions attached to her money. Sloane reluctantly allowed her to inspect the papers in his presence. Eleanor read each page once. Her father had trained her never to begin with the largest number. Fraud usually hid in small repetitions, a fee charged twice, an altered date, or a description copied by someone who did not understand its meaning. She found the error in the property schedule. The agreement described the Western Farms as one undivided holding transferred with all cottages, livestock, crops, and water rights. But Blackthorn's oldest farms had never formed a single holding. Each tenant possessed a separate customary lease, some dating back 3 generations. The Duke might mortgage his interest in the land, but the creditor could not remove tenants or seize their personal livestock without first examining each lease. Harcourt had treated families as though they were furniture included in a sale. "You may claim the Duke's financial interest," Eleanor told Sloane, "but you cannot evict these tenants today. The agreement grants possession of the land, subject to existing leases. If your men touch one animal or enter one occupied cottage without lawful notice, every tenant may petition the county magistrate." Sloane's eyes narrowed. "Do you possess the leases?" Eleanor looked toward Julian. The estate copies had been stored in Harcourt's office. Harcourt had emptied the cabinets that morning. Julian sent men to search the room, but the leases were gone. Without them, Eleanor's argument might delay the seizure for only a few hours. Bell stepped forward. "The tenants keep their own copies, Your Grace." Eleanor immediately ordered riders to visit every Western farm. Harcourt attempted to countermand her, but the frightened servants looked past him toward Julian. The Duke said nothing. Bell took his silence as permission. By 11 o'clock, tenants began arriving with folded leases, rent receipts, and parish records stored in wooden chests. Eleanor arranged them by farm and date across the dining table. She identified 14 families protected by lifetime tenancy, 9 whose livestock belonged entirely to them, and 7 whose leases required 6 months' notice before possession could change. At noon, Sloane could claim Blackthorn's rents, but he could not remove a single family. It was Eleanor's first victory over the scheme. The tenants cheered when Bell announced that they would remain in their homes. Julian stood at the edge of the crowd, watching his wife accomplish in hours what his authority could not. But the victory carried a terrible price. Pembroke and Vale took control of all income from the Western farms. Without those rents, Julian could not pay servants, purchase seed, repair the mill, or meet the estate's remaining obligations. His creditors also froze the household accounts until the full scale of Blackthorn's debt could be examined. By sunset, the Duke still possessed his title and house, but he no longer controlled the money needed to maintain either. Harcourt disappeared before he could be questioned. In his abandoned office, Eleanor found drawers emptied, ledgers burned, and the damaged brass measure missing. Only a circle of blue ink remained where it had once rested. Then a messenger arrived from London, with a notice addressed to Eleanor. Her father's former clerk had received the coded message and investigated Ashcombe Grain. The company was owned by a silent partner whose identity had been concealed through 3 separate registrations. The clerk had uncovered the final name, but before Eleanor could read it, a stone shattered the library window. The letter fell from her hand into the fire. Bell dragged it from the flames, but half the page had already burned away. Only one sentence remained legible. "The Western Farms will be sold at public auction in 7 days, after which no court can easily restore them." Bell pulled the burning letter from the fire with iron tongs and smothered the flames beneath the hearthrug. Most of the page had turned black, but Eleanor could still see fragments of the clerk's writing along one scorched edge. Registered under another name, former Blackthorn employee, payments routed through. The concealed owner's identity was gone. Eleanor wrapped the remains in clean linen and placed them inside a small tin box. "Seal this in front of Mr. Bell." Julian watched as she melted ivory wax over the clasp and pressed it with her personal stamp. "What good is half a letter?" he asked. "It proves that an investigation occurred before the auction was announced. It also preserves the handwriting, paper, and whatever words remain. Harcourt has fled. Everyone already knows he is guilty. No, everyone knows he disappeared. That is not the same as proving what he did or who helped him." Julian looked toward the broken window. "You believe he had an accomplice. I believe Harcourt could not create companies, redirect loan payments, and prepare an auction in 7 days without assistance in London." The Duke offered to place the tin box in his private safe. Eleanor refused. "You placed the estate seal in Harcourt's hands after I showed you how he was using it. My evidence will remain beyond your control." The words wounded him, but he did not challenge them. With Blackthorn's accounts frozen, Eleanor could no longer operate from the house. Sloane's clerks occupied the estate office, inventoried the furniture, and recorded every sack of grain as potential creditor property. Even the food in the pantry required written approval before it could be used. Eleanor moved her work to an abandoned schoolroom beside the village chapel. It smelled of chalk and damp wood, but it stood on parish land rather than ducal property. Pembroke and Vale could not enter without permission, and Julian could not remove her records with a household order. Bell carried the tenants' leases there in locked trunks. The cook sent bread. Clara returned from the seamstress's cottage with the coded needle and confirmation that Eleanor's message had reached London before Harcourt seized the post. One by one, frightened servants and tenants began visiting the schoolroom. Eleanor did not ask for rumours. She recorded only what each person had personally seen, then asked Bell to witness every statement. The head groom described wagons leaving Blackthorn after midnight. The cook identified suppliers whose deliveries had suddenly stopped. Reed provided receipts showing 6 months of rent paid directly to Harcourt. The accounts formed a pattern. Missing rents had been deposited into Ashcombe Grain. False supply charges were then paid from Blackthorn to the same company, making stolen money appear to be legitimate business income. Once the estate seemed unable to meet its obligations, Pembroke and Vale obtained the right to seize land worth several times the debt. Harcourt had been stealing the same money twice, yet Eleanor still lacked the connection between Ashcombe Grain and the creditor arranging the auction. She returned to Blackthorn after dark to examine the damaged clock in the Great Hall. Julian found her standing on a chair, inspecting the mechanism with a candle. "What are you doing?" The clock stopped when the wage chest was emptied. "I remember. Your footman wound them every evening, but they were dismissed the following morning. Someone needed darkness and silence while moving through the house." Julian steadied the chair as she climbed down. His hand remained briefly at her waist, then withdrew, as though he no longer possessed the right to touch her. Eleanor opened the clock's lower case. Inside lay a curl of blue sealing wax and several pale fibres. Julian frowned. Paper? Not ordinary paper. Packing straw. The old clock stood beside the passage leading from Harcourt's office to the Western service door. Someone had hidden a parcel inside the case, then removed it on the night the clock stopped. Bell had mentioned unrecorded wagons leaving through the western gate. Eleanor combined the details. Harcourt used the clock to conceal documents until a wagon could carry them away. The missing ledgers may not have been destroyed. They may have been sent somewhere before his office was searched. "To the Northern Mill," Julian said suddenly. Eleanor looked at him. "Harcourt often rode there after midnight. I once questioned him, but he said the mill required repairs." "You believed him?" "Yes." There was no defense in Julian's voice this time. They rode to the mill before dawn, with Bell and 2 trusted tenants. The building had been locked, but Reed possessed an old key retained under his family's lease. Inside, they found flour machinery covered in dust. Ashcombe Grain had never operated there. It had collected money for production that did not exist. Behind a stack of empty sacks, Eleanor discovered a shallow compartment beneath the floorboards. It contained duplicate invoices, rent books, and letters exchanged between Harcourt and Pembroke and Vale. Bell recorded where each bundle had been found. Reed witnessed the removal. Eleanor wrapped the documents without rearranging them and sealed the package with her ivory stamp. At last, they had evidence with a clear history. Among the papers was a list of payments made to Harcourt over 16 months. The first payment appeared 1 week after Eleanor and Julian announced their engagement. Harcourt had known her dowry was coming before he began accelerating the scheme. Julian read the figure and sat heavily on an overturned grain bin. "How much did you know about Blackthorn's debts before our marriage?" Eleanor asked. "Less than I claimed. You told my father the estate needed temporary investment. I believed that was true. You never examined the accounts. I allowed Harcourt to summarize them, and when I offered to examine them, I thought you wanted to control me with your money." Eleanor's anger softened for one dangerous moment. Julian looked stripped of the arrogance that had once made him seem untouchable. He lifted his eyes to hers. "You saved the tenants after I made their homes vulnerable. You fed my servants after I allowed Harcourt to starve them. And you are still trying to preserve an estate that has given you nothing but humiliation." "I am preserving the people," she replied. "Do not confuse that with preserving our marriage." "I do not." The quiet answer carried more remorse than any apology he had yet offered. Julian admitted that before their wedding, Eleanor's dowry had not merely delayed foreclosure. Her review of shipping agreements had also persuaded 2 creditors to reduce their interest. He had allowed London society to praise his negotiation while never acknowledging that the decisive calculations were hers. "If the estate survives," Eleanor said, "you will correct that publicly." "I will. You will restore the dismissed servants, pay every missing wage from your private income, and place the tenant leases beyond Harcourt's reach." "Yes, and you will not ask what becomes of us until those things are done." Julian's face tightened, but he nodded. "On your terms." It was not forgiveness. It was the first honest agreement between them. They carried the sealed documents back to the village schoolroom and placed them in the iron parish chest. Bell, Reed, and the chapel warden each signed a record confirming the contents and custody. The chest required 2 separate keys, one held by Bell, the other by the warden. Eleanor finally possessed evidence Harcourt could not easily explain away. That evening, however, smoke rose above the village. Eleanor ran from Blackthorn and saw flames climbing through the schoolroom windows. Villagers formed a line at the well, passing buckets hand to hand, but the fire had already reached the roof. Bell rushed toward the parish chest. Before he could enter, 2 masked men dragged it through the rear door and loaded it onto a waiting wagon. Julian seized one man, tearing away his mask, while the other struck Bell and escaped with the chest. The captured attacker carried no papers and refused to speak. But inside his coat, Eleanor found a brass measuring tool with one edge filed into a crescent. Harcourt had discovered their progress, and he had just taken every document they believed would save Blackthorn. Julian held the captured attacker against the ground, while Eleanor examined the brass measure. At first glance, it appeared identical to the tool Harcourt had carried, but when she turned it beneath the firelight, she noticed that the crescent had been filed into the left edge. The mark on Reed's receipts and the fraudulent invoices curved from the right. This object had been made to resemble Harcourt's tool, but whoever prepared it had copied the damage incorrectly. "It was planted," Eleanor said. Julian tightened his grip on the attacker. "Who paid you?" The man spat blood into the grass and remained silent. The schoolroom roof collapsed, sending sparks into the night. The parish chest was already disappearing along the eastern road. With the leases and account books inside it, Pembroke and Vale could claim that Eleanor had never possessed evidence against them. Worse, the fire gave Harcourt a new weapon. By sunrise, notices appeared in the village accusing Eleanor of stealing estate records and burning the schoolroom to hide her fraud. The printed statement claimed she had bribed tenants, forged receipts, and conspired with servants to obtain control of Blackthorn's fortune. At the bottom appeared Julian's ducal crest. The seal made the accusations seem official. Villagers who had trusted Eleanor now watched her with uncertainty. If she were convicted of theft or arson, she could be confined, while Harcourt completed the auction without opposition. 2 county constables arrived before breakfast. Mr. Sloane accompanied them. "Her Grace must answer several questions," he said. "The stolen records belong to Blackthorn's creditors. They were taken from us during the fire," Julian replied. Sloane looked toward the burned schoolroom. "Conveniently, there is no proof they ever existed. We have 3 witnesses. Mr. Bell is your servant. Mr. Reed is a debtor whom Her Grace paid to protect. The chapel warden has admitted that he never examined the papers inside the chest. The attack had been carefully designed. Harcourt had not needed to destroy every witness. He had only needed to make each one appear dependent upon Eleanor. One constable approached her. Julian stepped between them. "My wife is not leaving. Then you must provide evidence that she acted under your authority." Eleanor looked at him. She knew what the statement would cost. If Julian admitted that he had participated in the search of the mill, he would also admit that he knew Harcourt's authority had been abused before allowing the auction to proceed. Pembroke and Vale could accuse him of concealing evidence from creditors. His political allies would withdraw their support, and he might lose the parliamentary appointment his family had pursued for years. Julian knew it too. He turned to the assembled tenants and servants. "My wife did not steal those records," he said. "I entered the northern mill with her. I watched her find them beneath the floorboards, and I helped carry them to the parish chest." Sloane's expression sharpened. "You knowingly removed documents belonging to the secured estate. I removed evidence of fraud committed under my name. You signed the agreements." "I did." "You transferred authority to Harcourt." "I did." "And you continued defending him after Her Grace raised concerns." Julian's voice dropped, but it remained clear. "I did." The admissions travelled through the crowd like a cold wind. Julian removed the silver badge, representing his county office, and handed it to the senior constable. "Send this with my written statement to the Lord Lieutenant. I will resign my position before Harcourt can use it to silence an inquiry." For years, Julian had valued his influence more than Eleanor's judgment. Now he surrendered it publicly, without asking whether the sacrifice would restore their marriage. The constables no longer had grounds to take Eleanor away, but Julian's confession could not recover the stolen chest. Sloane announced that the auction would proceed in 2 days. Unless Eleanor produced verifiable evidence before then, the Western farms would be sold and all disputed records declared lost. Harcourt returned to Blackthorn that afternoon. He arrived in a polished carriage beside a London solicitor and walked into the Great Hall wearing a new black coat. He no longer pretended to be a loyal steward. "I have come to attend the sale," he said. Julian crossed the hall and struck him. Harcourt staggered against a marble column, blood appearing at the corner of his mouth. Still, he smiled. "That will make a useful addition to the Duke's confession." Eleanor stepped between them before Julian could strike again. "Where is the parish chest?" "I know nothing about it." "And the schoolroom fire?" "A tragic result of storing papers beside old timber." "You seem remarkably informed about where the chest was kept." The entire village knew. Harcourt's solicitor opened a document case. "My client maintains that Her Grace fabricated accusations after learning her dowry would be used to satisfy lawful debts. He will demonstrate at the auction that Ashcombe Grain is a legitimate company, with no financial connection to him." "Who owns it?" Eleanor asked. "That information will be provided to the successful purchaser." Harcourt believed the stolen documents had erased the connection. He was confident because the company registrations alone concealed his name. That night, Eleanor returned to the ruins of the schoolroom. Ash coated the stones, and rain had turned the floor to black mud. She searched until her hands were raw, hoping the thieves had dropped a page or broken the chest's seal. She found nothing. Julian knelt beside her and lifted a charred strip of wood. "We may have lost." Eleanor looked at the false brass measure they had recovered from the attacker. The crescent had been copied incorrectly. Harcourt's real tool had marked every fraudulent document, but no longer possessing the receipts meant she could not compare them publicly. Then she remembered something. The parish chest had been sealed before the fire, and no public list of its contents had ever been made. Harcourt could claim the papers were fabricated, but he could not safely describe them without revealing that he had opened the stolen chest. Eleanor rose. "He says he knows nothing about the chest," she said. Julian followed her reasoning. "But if he stole it, he knows precisely what was inside. We will give him one false detail." She explained the plan. At the auction, Bell would announce that the chest contained a signed confession from one of Harcourt's London partners. No such confession existed, but only the thief would know that. Harcourt would have 2 choices: remain silent and allow the supposed confession to destroy his company, or deny its existence with knowledge no innocent man could possess. "That may expose his connection to the theft," Julian said. "It will not prove the larger fraud, no, but it will force him to defend himself. And when frightened men defend a lie, they reveal which truth they fear most." Eleanor looked toward Blackthorn's dark western fields. At noon the following day, the estate would be crowded with creditors, tenants, county officials, and prospective purchasers. Harcourt expected to acquire the farms while Eleanor watched helplessly. Instead, she would make him lie before every person whose silence he had purchased. The auction began at noon in Blackthorn's great hall. Long tables had been arranged beneath the ancestral portraits, and prospective buyers filled the room alongside tenants, creditors, county officials, and servants. Mr. Sloane stood at the front with the sale documents. Harcourt occupied a chair beside him, as though he were already master of the Western farms. Eleanor entered wearing a plain burgundy gown. Belle walked behind her carrying the sealed tin box containing the burned fragment of the London letter. Julian followed at a respectful distance. Harcourt rose. Before this sale proceeds, those present should know that the Duchess of Blackthorn has repeatedly interfered with lawful estate business. She bribed a tenant, stole private records, and concealed them in a building that later burned. Reed reacted angrily, but Eleanor raised one hand. Let him finish. Harcourt presented a clear and believable story. Eleanor had resented her husband's authority, he claimed, so she encouraged servants to invent unpaid wages. She then paid Reed's alleged debt to make him loyal to her. Finally, she created false documents connecting Harcourt to Ashcombe Grain and destroyed them before anyone independent could inspect them. Several buyers nodded. Harcourt had built his defense from real events, altering only their meaning. When he finished, Eleanor approached the table. You say the documents in the parish chest were false. I say no trustworthy person examined them. That was not my question. Harcourt's solicitor stood. My client cannot judge papers he has never seen. Eleanor turned toward the audience. Mr. Bell, please describe how the chest was secured. Bell explained that the documents had been wrapped at the Northern Mill, sealed with Eleanor's ivory stamp, and placed in the parish chest before 3 witnesses. He and the chapel warden had retained separate keys. Neither could open it alone. And did the chest contain a signed confession from Mr. Nathaniel Price of Pembroke and Vale? Eleanor asked. A stir moved through the room. Harcourt laughed too quickly. There was no confession. Silence fell. Eleanor faced him. How can you know? His smile disappeared. You claimed moments ago that you never saw the contents. I assumed. You did not say you doubted the confession. You said it was not there. Harcourt's solicitor reached for his arm, but Eleanor continued. Was the supposed confession written on white paper or blue? I have no idea. Did it bear 1 signature or 2? I told you. He stopped. Eleanor let the unfinished answer hang before the county officials. The chest contained no confession, she said. I invented it this morning. Only Bell, my husband, and I knew that I intended to mention one. Yet Mr. Harcourt was certain it did not exist. One of the magistrate's clerks began recording the exchange. Sloane intervened. Even if Harcourt knew the chest's contents, that does not invalidate Blackthorn's debts. No, Eleanor agreed. It establishes that the chest was stolen because it contained something worth hiding. She asked Reed to come forward. Bell produced the tenant receipts they had preserved separately before the fire. Eleanor placed one beneath a magnifying lens and invited the magistrate to examine the seal. Each receipt bears a crescent pressed into the right edge of the wax. The same mark appeared on Ashcombe Grain's invoices. Harcourt removed a brass measure from his pocket and placed it on the table. This is the tool Her Grace repeatedly mentions. You can see that it has no damaged edge. Eleanor had expected him to produce a clean replacement. She presented the false measure recovered from the masked attacker. Its crescent curved from the left. This was carried by the man who helped steal the parish chest. Someone filed it to resemble the original tool, but copied the damage backward. Harcourt spread his hands. Then your own evidence proves that another person possessed such a measure. It proves someone wanted the crime traced to an object that could later be declared harmless. You cannot show that I ever owned the damaged one. Mr. Bell can. A servant dependent upon you. Duke Julian can. A husband desperate to escape his own debts. Harcourt attacked each witness exactly as Eleanor knew he would. He believed that if every person had a motive, no testimony could be trusted. Eleanor changed direction. Let us forget the brass measure. When did Ashcombe Grain begin supplying Blackthorn? 16 months ago. And where was its flour produced? At the Northern Mill, which was leased to the company. Yes. What repairs were made before production began? Harcourt hesitated. The machinery was restored. How many millstones were replaced? 2. What powered them? The water wheel. Naturally, Eleanor placed the old household ledger on the table. It had remained in her writing case and had never entered the stolen parish chest. The Northern Mills water channel collapsed 3 years ago. The estate declined to repair it because rebuilding the stonework would cost more than the mill earned. She turned to Julian. When you visited the building with me, did you see a functioning water wheel? No. The wheel was broken and the channel was dry. Reed confirmed that no grain had been milled there for years. Eleanor faced the buyers. Ashcombe Grain charged Blackthorn for flour it could not have produced at the place named in its contracts. The company existed only on paper. Sloane objected that it might have purchased flour elsewhere. Then its invoices should identify transportation costs, outside mills, or commercial suppliers. Eleanor replied. They identify none. She next showed how the missing rents entered Ashcombe Grain's accounts shortly before false supply bills withdrew similar amounts from Blackthorn. The figures did not merely resemble one another, they repeated in the same sequence, including an unusual payment of £47.13. Harcourt claimed the pattern was coincidence. Eleanor produced Clara's sewing needle and explained the coded message sent to London. She then opened the tin box and displayed the burned letter fragment, confirming that Ashcombe Grain had been traced through several hidden registrations. Harcourt's solicitor examined it. The owner's name is missing. The fire destroyed that portion. Then this proves nothing against my client. Not by itself. The great doors opened. Clara entered beside Mr. Andrew Finch, the former clerk from Eleanor's father's trading company. He carried a locked leather case and a registry certificate bearing an official London stamp. Harcourt's face changed for the first time. Eleanor had not depended solely upon the stolen documents. After receiving her coded message, Finch had continued tracing Ashcombe Grain through company registrations, bank deposits, and the original signatures held in London. Sloane stood abruptly. This sale must proceed. The repayment deadline has passed. The sale cannot transfer property obtained through fraud, Eleanor said. That has not been proven. Finch placed the leather case on the table. Bell examined its unbroken seals, and the magistrate recorded its arrival before opening it. Inside were certified copies of Ashcombe Grain's registration, payments made to Harcourt, and instructions sent to Pembroke and Vale before Julian signed the Western Farm Agreement. But one name mattered above all, the silent partner who would receive the farms after the auction. Finch unfolded the final certificate and turned it toward the magistrate. The signature at the bottom belonged to someone standing inside the Great Hall. The signature belonged to Mr. Sloane. A murmur swept through the Great Hall as every face turned toward the creditor's agent. Sloane remained standing beside the auction table, but the confidence had disappeared from his expression. Finch placed the certified registration before the magistrate. Ashcombe Grain was formed under 3 separate names, he explained. The final registration identifies Mr. Edmund Sloane as its principal investor and Mr. Harcourt as its operating partner. Harcourt moved toward the side door. 2 constables blocked his path. Sloane recovered first. An investment in a supplier is not a crime. No, Eleanor said. But creating a false supplier to drain the estate you intend to seize is fraud. She arranged the documents in a simple sequence so every tenant and servant could follow. 16 months earlier, Sloane had learned that Julian intended to marry Eleanor and that her dowry would rescue Blackthorn. He approached Harcourt with a plan. Harcourt would inflate household expenses, steal rents, and replace legitimate suppliers with Ashcombe Grain. The false company would receive Blackthorn's money while producing nothing. Sloane then used Pembroke and Vale to issue loans covering the artificial losses. Those loans were secured against the Western farms, which were worth more than 3 times the debt. Once Eleanor's marriage settlement became known, Harcourt accelerated the scheme. If her second dowry payment reached Blackthorn, the conspirators would use false debts to absorb it. If the payment failed, they would seize the farms instead. Either outcome enriched them. Eleanor's arrival threatened everything because she understood contracts and accounts. Harcourt therefore encouraged Julian's resentment, presenting every question from his wife as an attempt to control him. But Harcourt could not remove me himself, Eleanor said. He required my husband to do it for him. The room grew silent. She looked toward Julian. He gave Harcourt the household keys. He dismissed the servants who knew the old accounts. He refused to examine the mill. the receipts, and the sealing tool. Finally, he signed away estate authority without reading the terms. Julian stepped beside her. "My wife warned me," he said, repeatedly. "I chose to protect my pride rather than listen to her. Harcourt deceived me, but deception succeeded because I gave him every opportunity." He turned toward the servants and tenants. "I accused loyal people of disobedience. I allowed wages to be stolen, families to face eviction, and my wife to be humiliated in the house her fortune preserved. Those acts were mine. No punishment given to Harcourt can erase my responsibility." Harcourt's face twisted. "You would surrender your own name for hers?" "No," Julian replied. "I am correcting the damage I caused to hers." Sloane attempted to challenge the records, claiming Finch's certified copies might have been obtained improperly. The magistrate examined the seals and asked Finch how the documents had been traced. Finch produced the original registration numbers, bank receipts, and 2 letters written in Harcourt's hand. The payments matched the false invoices down to the final shilling. One letter instructed Sloane to schedule the auction before Eleanor completed 90 days at Blackthorn. The second ordered him to ensure that the Duchess's interference ended before summer. Bell authenticated Harcourt's handwriting from 16 years of household instructions. Reed identified the rent figures taken from his payments. Julian confirmed that the signature authorizing the Western Farm Agreement was his own, but stated that Harcourt had concealed the property schedule while urging him to sign quickly. Then Eleanor presented the final link. Mr. Harcourt claimed that Ashcombe Grain produced flour at the Northern Mill, yet the mill could not operate. Where did the flour delivered to Blackthorn actually come from? The cook stepped forward. She recognized the markings on the surviving flour sack. It belonged to Blackthorn's own Western granary. Harcourt had removed grain collected as rent, transported it through the Western Gate at night, and sold it back to the household under Ashcombe Grain's name. The packing straw found inside the stopped clock matched the straw used around the granary sacks. The clocks had been silenced, so wagons could move through the courtyard unnoticed while the servants slept. Nothing in the scheme had been accidental. The missing flour, unpaid wages, false receipts, fabricated loans, stopped clocks, and attempted seizure were all parts of the same design. Sloane's solicitor quietly closed his document case and moved away from his client. The magistrate suspended the auction. The Western Farm transfer was declared disputed property, pending a formal hearing, and Pembroke and Vale's representatives were ordered to surrender every account connected to Blackthorn. Harcourt was arrested for theft, fraud, destruction of evidence, and conspiracy in the schoolroom fire. The captured attacker later identified the warehouse where the parish chest had been hidden. Its seals were broken, but the surviving ledgers remained inside. Sloane was taken into custody after attempting to leave through the servants' passage. Pembroke and Vale removed his authority, opened their records to investigators, and withdrew every loan created through Ashcombe Grain. The legitimate debt remained, but it was less than 1/3 of the sum Harcourt had claimed. Blackthorn would survive. Julian did not escape consequence. His resignation from county office was accepted. He sold his London residence and 2 unentailed hunting properties to repay the valid creditors and restore every stolen wage. The money also repaired the Northern Mill and replaced the tenants' missing grain. He publicly acknowledged that Eleanor's dowry and expertise, not his negotiation, had preserved Blackthorn. Copies of the correction were sent to every creditor and family who had heard that she was dishonest or unstable. Most importantly, he ordered a new legal settlement prepared before independent trustees chosen by Eleanor. Her remaining dowry would never pass into his personal control. She received a secured annual income, authority over household management, and the right to reside separately whenever she wished. When the document was complete, Julian placed it before her without asking for forgiveness. "This cannot repay what I took from you," he said, "but it may prevent me or any man after me from taking it again." Eleanor read every page. "You surrendered the London house?" "Yes." "And the hunting properties?" "Yes. You could have preserved one by dismissing several tenant families." "I have dismissed enough innocent people," she signed. Spring passed slowly. Eleanor did not return immediately to the Duchess's apartments. She remained in the eastern rooms and required Julian to address household matters through written requests. He accepted the distance without complaint. He attended meetings when invited, listened when servants spoke, and never again signed a document he had not read. He restored Clara to Eleanor's service, Belle to his position, and every dismissed servant who wished to return. Some refused. Julian provided them with full wages and honest references anyway. By early summer, Blackthorn had changed. The northern mill turned again. Servants received their wages on the same day each month. Tenant receipts were copied into 3 separate books, preventing one steward from controlling the entire record. Eleanor chaired the weekly household meeting from the head of the long table. No order was issued without her review. One warm evening, Julian found her in the great hall beneath the portraits where he had once predicted she would not last a month. He carried the restored ring of household keys. "I told Belle you would soon be gone," he said. "I remember. By summer, you are running the entire house, more efficiently than your steward did." A faint smile touched Julian's face, then faded. "I do not expect everything to return to what it was. It cannot. But if there is ever a place for me in the future you build, I would like to earn it." Eleanor studied him. His remorse no longer arrived in speeches or desperate promises. It lived in the property he had surrendered, the reputation he had corrected, and the authority he had returned without conditions. "You may remain at Blackthorn," she said, "but we begin again as 2 people deciding whether they can trust each other, not as a duke expecting obedience from his wife." "I accept." She held out her hand. Julian placed the keys in her palm. Months earlier, he had given them to Harcourt to prove Eleanor possessed no power in his house. Now he released them without ceremony and stepped back, leaving the decision entirely hers. Eleanor crossed the great hall, opened the estate office, and invited Belle, Clara, and the cook inside for the weekly accounts meeting. Julian waited at the threshold until she looked toward him. "You may enter," she said. He did. Eleanor closed the door, turned the key, and took her place at the head of the table.